This house wasn't just a home. It was a canvas. Marie and I painted it with our dreams. Every nail and plank a brush stroke in the masterpiece of our life together. It was her idea to restore the old Victorian wreck at the edge of town, a house that others saw as a ruin, but she saw as potential. This place is character, she told me the first time we stood in the dusty, cobweb foyer. Her voice echoed in the empty space, full of conviction. It just needs someone to love it again. Marie had a way of seeing beauty in broken things. It's what I loved most about her. At the time, I didn't see what she saw. All I noticed was the rotting wood, the peeling wallpaper, the sagging staircase. But Marie? She saw Sunday mornings by the bay window, the smell of coffee wafting through the air. She saw family. And because I trusted her, because I loved her, I picked up a hammer and got to work. By the time we finished, the house didn't just belong to us, it was us. When Marie got sick, it was like a crack forming in the foundation of everything we built. It started small, little things you could ignore if you tried hard enough. She got tired more easily, laughed less often, but the crack widened, and soon it wasn't something we could ignore anymore. The diagnosis came on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that should have been unremarkable. I remember sitting in the doctor's office, staring at the diplomas on the wall as though they'd tell me what to do. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said, her voice gentle but clinical. "It's advanced." Marie's hand was warm in mine, steady, even as the words hung in the air like a death sentence. "We'll fight it," I told her later, gripping her hands like my life depended on it. "Whatever it takes, we'll fight it." She smiled, soft and knowing. "We will," she said, "but you'll have to fight harder." Even as the illness took its toll, Marie was still Marie. She didn't want pity or tears. She wanted normalcy. She wanted to drink her coffee in the mornings and watch the sun set from our porch. She wanted to live. On her last day, she grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Her voice steady despite the weakness in her body. "You're going to be okay," she said. "You'll keep creating, right? Don't stop. Promise me." I nodded, though I didn't believe her. "I promise." Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. I kept my promise at first. I painted through the grief, through the endless hollow days that followed her death. But no matter how many strokes I laid down, no matter how many canvases I filled, nothing felt right. The house became a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the walls reminded me of her. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air long after she was gone, like a ghost refusing to leave. People told me time would heal. I hated them for it. Time didn't heal. It just numbed. And that's when Sophia came into my life. I met her at a gallery opening, one I'd been dragged to by an old friend who said I needed to get back out there. I spent most of the evening in the corner, nursing a glass of cheap wine and pretending to care about the abstract nonsense on the walls. Then she walked in. Sophia didn't just enter a room, she took command of it. She was younger, vibrant, her laugh cutting through the murmur of conversation like a spark in the dark. She wasn't beautiful in a conventional way, but there was something magnetic about her, something alive. "Are you the artist?" she asked, her eyes locking onto mine from across the room. I told her I was, though I wasn't sure it was true anymore. "You look like someone who's seen too much," she said, tilting her head. "That's where the best art comes from." Her words reminded me of Marie, and maybe that's why I let her in. Sophia was everything Marie wasn't. Where Marie was calm and steady, Sophia was electric and unpredictable. She filled the house with noise and energy, her laugh bouncing off the walls like music. For a while, it felt like I could breathe again. We married less than a year after we met. It was fast, too fast, according to my friends, but I didn't care. After losing Marie, the idea of waiting seemed ridiculous. Sophia brought life back into the house. She convinced me to start painting again, though my work was darker now, more raw. She didn't mind. "Paint what's real," she said, echoing Marie's advice in her own way. For a while, I thought I'd found my second chance. Nathan loved her too. My younger brother had always been my opposite. Where I was quiet and introspective, Nathan was outgoing and magnetic. He had a way of making people feel like they were the center of the universe when he spoke to them. After Marie died, Nathan was there for me in a way no one else could be. He didn't try to fix me or fill the silence with platitudes. He just showed up. "You've got to finish the house," he told me one night, handing me a beer as we stood in the unfinished living room. Marie would have wanted it. When Sophia came into my life, Nathan was the first to meet her. He charmed her instantly, as he did everyone. "She's great," he told me after their first dinner together. "I'm happy for you, man. You deserve this." At the time, I believed him. Looking back, the signs were there from the beginning. The way Sophia laughed a little too hard at his jokes. The way Nathan always seemed to find an excuse to stick around a little longer when she was home. But at the time, I ignored it. I wanted to believe I'd found my second chance. I wanted to believe in the life I was rebuilding. And maybe that's why it hurts so much when it all fell apart. Denial is a powerful thing. It's the safety net we fall back on when the truth feels too unbearable to face. I'd always thought of myself as someone who could see things for what they were, someone who wouldn't turn a blind eye to the obvious. But love, I've learned, makes liars of us all. It started small, little things I could explain away if I tried hard enough. Sophia and I had a dinner party, a casual evening with close friends. Nathan was there. Of course, he always seemed to be around in those days. He was his usual charming self, cracking jokes and keeping the room alive with his easy laughter. At one point, Oliver, an old friend of mine, made a playful jab at Nathan. "You're always dating, never committing," he said, wagging a finger. "What's the deal? Can't find the right woman or can't keep her?" Everyone laughed, including Sophia, but her laugh was different. It was too loud, too forced, like she was trying to smother something else. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked down at her plate, her fork idly pushing around a piece of bread. Nathan, oblivious or maybe pretending to be, smiled broadly. "It's not about settling, Oliver. It's about standards. You wouldn't understand." Sophia glanced at him then, her lips curling into a smile, small, almost private. For a moment, I felt like an outsider in my own home, watching something I wasn't meant to see. Later that night, as we cleaned up the kitchen, I decided to test the waters. "You seem to like Nathan a lot," I said casually, scrubbing a wine glass under the warm stream of water. Sophia froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then she laughed, light and airy, but her voice was tight. "He's your brother. Of course I like him. Why wouldn't I?" "No reason. You just seem close," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She tilted her head, giving me that playful, almost scolding look she used when she thought I was being ridiculous. "You're reading into things," she said lightly, brushing past me to put a plate on the rack. "It's Nathan, don't be silly." Her words were casual, but her tone didn't sit right with me. The next incident was more tangible, something I couldn't shake. We'd gone hiking with a group of friends, taking advantage of the crisp autumn weather. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of fallen leaves, and for a while, I felt at peace. Being outside, away from the confines of the house, was a welcome reprieve. One of the kids brought along a camera, snapping pictures throughout the day. When the photos were shared later, one caught my attention. It was a group shot at the summit, the sun setting behind us, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Everyone looked happy, flushed with the effort of the climb and the crispness of the air. But my eyes went straight to Sophia and Nathan. They were standing next to each other, their bodies angled slightly inward. Sophia's hand rested lightly on Nathan's arm, her smile warm and unguarded. It wasn't obvious, not something anyone else would notice, but to me, it felt too familiar. I stared at that photo for far too long, my mind replaying every interaction between them from the past few weeks. Am I imagining this? I wondered, my chest tightening. Am I making something out of nothing? But the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. Then there was the bracelet. Sophia had always been open about her little indulgences, new jewelry, handbags, things like that. She loved gifts, especially ones I bought her. She'd twirl her wrist or her fingers, making sure I noticed the light catching on some new accessory. That's why it struck me as odd when she walked into the living room one Sunday afternoon wearing a simple gold bracelet I'd never seen before. It wasn't her usual style. Too plain, too understated. "New bracelet?" I asked, glancing up from the book in my lap. She hesitated for just a moment before smiling. "Yeah, a friend gave it to me." Her tone was casual, but there was something behind it. Something guarded. Oh, which friend? She shrugged, heading toward the kitchen. Just someone from work. That was it. No further explanation. That evening, Nathan stopped by as he often did. He leaned against the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up as we chatted about nothing in particular. Then he shifted his arm, and there it was, the exact same bracelet, glinting under the warm light. I felt my chest tighten, my breath hitching for just a moment. It was subtle, but unmistakable. It wasn't a coincidence. I didn't say anything. I didn't let on, but something inside me shifted. A quiet, simmering anger took root, threading its way through the cracks that had already begun to form. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sophia slept soundly beside me, her breathing slow and even while my mind raced. I wanted to believe her, to trust her, to tell myself that everything was fine, but the bracelet, the photograph, her laugh at dinner, they were all pieces of a puzzle I couldn't ignore. By the time the sun rose, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than a gut feeling and a few coincidences. I needed proof. As I lay there, a quiet resolve settled over me. Sophia and Nathan thought they were clever. They thought I wasn't paying attention, but they were wrong. I'd let them think they were safe. I'd let them dig their own graves. And when the time was right, I'd bury them in the truth. Some truths can't be ignored forever. You can try to bury them under logic, denial, or hope, but they find a way to surface, like paint bleeding through a canvas, no matter how many layers you add. I woke up that morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The bracelet, the photo, her laugh, they weren't coincidences. They were threads, and it was time to start pulling. I decided to start with observation. Nothing overt, just paying closer attention, catching the moments I might have missed before. That evening, I suggested a casual dinner. Why don't we invite Nathan? I asked Sophia over coffee. Her reaction was subtle, but telling. Her eyes flickered just for a second before she nodded. Sure, she said, her voice too light. Why not? Nathan arrived just after 7, carrying a bottle of wine and his usual easy charm. The three of us sat in the living room, chatting over drinks while the smell of Sophia's cooking filled the air. I watched them closely that night, though I pretended not to. Sophia sat across from me on the couch, Nathan beside her. I noticed the way her body angled slightly toward him, her legs crossed in his direction. When she laughed at something he said, she reached out, lightly touching his arm. It was a small gesture, one I wouldn't have thought twice about if I hadn't been looking for it. But now, every touch felt like a secret being shared in front of me. Later, over dinner, I decided to test them. So Nathan, I said casually, cutting into my steak, you've been spending a lot of time here lately. Sophia must be getting tired of seeing you all the time. Sophia froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Nathan, to his credit, didn't miss a beat. I'm just helping out, he said with a laugh. The house is practically my second home. Sophia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We don't mind. It's nice having him around, isn't it, Ethan? Her voice was light, but there was an edge to it. A challenge almost? Of course, I said, matching her tone. Family is everything. After Nathan left that night, Sophia was quiet as she cleaned up the kitchen. I watched her from the doorway, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided looking at me. Is everything okay? I asked finally. She glanced up, startled. What? Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't it be? I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. You just seem off. She laughed, the sound forced. I'm fine, just tired. She turned back to the sink, but I didn't move. In that moment, I knew I couldn't rely on observation alone. I needed more, something concrete. The next day, I drove to an electronics store and bought a small, discreet camera. The kind meant for home security, though I had a different purpose in mind. I installed it in my studio that afternoon while Sophia was out running errands. The studio was the perfect place. Far enough from the main house that they might think it was safe, but close enough that I could monitor it easily. I positioned the camera on a high shelf, hidden among stacks of books and supplies. It was angled toward the couch in the corner, where I often sketched or worked on small pieces. If they were using my studio, I'd know soon enough. The first few days, there was nothing. Sophia and Nathan acted like nothing was out of the ordinary, and I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Then, one afternoon, the camera caught something. I was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through the footage on my laptop while Sophia was upstairs. Most of it was uneventful, just me working or the empty studio at night. But then, around 3 p.m. on Tuesday, there they were, Sophia and Nathan. They walked into the studio together, their voices low. Sophia glanced around, as if to make sure no one was watching before sitting down on the couch. Nathan followed, standing close enough that their knees almost touched. At first, their conversation seemed harmless, casual, but the way they looked at each other told a different story. Nathan leaned in, resting a hand on her knee. She didn't pull away. I paused the footage, my heart pounding. This wasn't nothing. I didn't confront them that night, not yet. Instead, I played the footage over and over, analyzing every second. The way Sophia's hand lingered on Nathan's arm, the way Nathan's voice softened when he spoke to her. I wasn't angry, at least not yet. I was numb, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart on a screen. But beneath the numbness, something else was brewing. By the time the sun rose, my plan was clear. Sophia and Nathan thought they were safe, that their secret would stay hidden. But secrets, I've learned, are fragile things. All it takes is one crack and they shatter, and I was going to be the one to break them. I always thought of myself as someone who could handle the truth, no matter how hard it hit. But there's a difference between thinking you're ready and actually facing it. The footage from the studio had been bad enough, but it wasn't definitive. A hand on a knee, lingering glances, those could still be explained away, couldn't they? I told myself it wasn't enough, even though deep down I knew better. But the truth has a way of making itself known, no matter how much you try to delay it. It was Friday evening when it happened. Sophia had gone out for a yoga class, leaving me alone in the house. She'd been doing that a lot lately, finding reasons to leave, always with vague explanations that didn't quite add up. I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, scrolling through the day's footage. Most of it was uneventful. The usual shots of me painting, the empty studio, nothing remarkable. And then, at 6:17 p.m., they appeared. Nathan entered first, glancing over his shoulder before stepping inside. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Sophia followed moments later, closing the door behind her. I paused the footage, my heart pounding. I forced myself to keep watching. At first, they just talked. I couldn't make out the words. There was no sound, but their body language spoke volumes. Nathan stood close, his posture tense, while Sophia leaned against the couch, her arms crossed. She said something and Nathan laughed, but it wasn't his usual easy laugh. It was strained, nervous. Then he stepped closer. Sophia didn't move away. If anything, she tilted her head toward him, her lips curling into that familiar, infuriating smile. Nathan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I watched. Sophia said something, and Nathan hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might back away, that this would end here. But then she leaned in and kissed him. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen. My chest felt tight, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself, but it was no use. It was real. The betrayal I tried so hard to deny was right there, playing out in front of me like some sick, twisted performance. I wanted to scream, to break something, to storm into the studio and drag them both out by their throats, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there in the dark, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. An hour passed, maybe two. Eventually, I opened the laptop again. I needed to see it through, no matter how much it hurt. The footage continued. After the kiss, they pulled away, their faces flushed. Nathan said something, his hands gesturing animatedly, but Sophia just smiled. Reaching out to touch his arm, they sat down on the couch, their bodies close, their movements easy, familiar. They'd done this before. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a one-time thing, a moment of weakness. This was a pattern, a routine. They were comfortable. By the time Sophia came home, I'd already hidden the laptop and composed myself. "Hey," she said, breezing into the kitchen with that same cheerful energy, she always had after her yoga classes. "How was your evening?" I forced a smile, my hands steady as I poured a glass of water. "Quiet, just worked on a few sketches." She nodded, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. Her lips were warm, soft, and all I could think about was how they'd been on Nathan's not long ago. "I'm going to shower," she said, heading upstairs without waiting for a response. I watched her go, my mind racing. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the studio, staring at the empty canvas in front of me. My hands itched to paint, to channel the anger, the pain, the betrayal into something tangible. But every time I picked up the brush, the images from the footage came rushing back. Her laugh, his touch, the way they looked at each other. It wasn't just the act itself that hurt. It was the trust they'd shattered. The life they'd torn apart piece by piece while I was too blind to see it. But I wasn't blind anymore. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Anger was too easy, too simple. It wouldn't undo what they'd done, wouldn't give me the satisfaction I craved. No, this called for something more. They thought they were clever, that they'd gotten away with it. They thought I was still the grieving widower, too broken to notice the cracks forming around me. But they were wrong. I was going to make them pay, and I was going to make it hurt. As I sat in the studio, sketching the first outlines of a new painting, a plan began to take shape. My art had always been about creation, beauty, light, hope, but this time it would be about destruction. Sophia and Nathan had turned my life into a canvas of lies. Now, I'd turn their lies into a masterpiece. Revenge is a curious thing. You'd think it would consume you, blind you to everything else. But for me, it brought clarity. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I needed to do. No more doubts, no more second-guessing. Nathan and Sophia had taken my trust, my love, and turned it into a mockery. Now, I would take their lies and turn them into something unforgettable. My art had always been a refuge. Now it would become my weapon. I started with a sketch. It was late at night, the house silent except for the faint of the heater. Sophia was asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of what I was planning. I sat in the studio, the same space they'd turned into their personal sanctuary of betrayal, and began to draw. The first strokes came easily, almost instinctively. I didn't think about what I was creating. I just let the pencil move across the page, guided by anger, pain, and something darker. When I stepped back to look at it, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The sketch showed a man and a woman, their faces obscured, locked in a tender embrace. But there was nothing tender about the image. The lines were jagged, the shadows deep and oppressive. Behind them stood another figure shrouded in darkness, watching. It was the watcher I identified with most. Over the next few days, the sketch became a painting. I worked obsessively, pouring every ounce of emotion into the canvas. My hands ached, my back stiffened, but I didn't stop. The colors were bold and chaotic, blood reds, shadowy blacks, and muted grays. The couple in the painting became more defined as I worked. The woman had Sophia's golden hair, her delicate features. The man had Nathan's sharp jawline, his confident posture. And the watcher, that was me. I painted myself cloaked in shadow, my eyes glowing faintly from the darkness. It was a presence both menacing and powerless, a silent observer to their treachery. When it was finished, I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. It was raw, ugly, powerful, exactly what I needed it to be. That painting was just the beginning. Over the next several weeks, I created more. Each piece told a part of the story, our story. One painting depicted a golden house crumbling under the weight of vines that wrapped around it like a stranglehold. The vines bled crimson sap, dripping onto the ruined foundation below. Another showed a masquerade ball, the dancers wearing masks of joy, while their eyes betrayed nothing but sorrow. In the center of the scene stood a couple, their masks slipping, revealing faces twisted with guilt. Each painting was more cathartic than the last. With every brush stroke, I felt a little of the anger drained from me, replaced by cold determination. These weren't just paintings. They were confessions laid bare on canvas for the world to see. One night, as I worked on the final piece, Sophia came into the studio. I froze, my brush hovering over the canvas as she stepped closer. "You've been spending a lot of time in here," she said, her voice soft. "Just trying to get back into the groove?" I replied, keeping my tone casual. She walked around the room, her eyes scanning the paintings that lined the walls. Most of them were covered, but a few were exposed. Abstracts, nothing too revealing. "You've been so productive lately," she said, turning to me with a smile. "It's good to see you painting again." I nodded, my grip on the brush tightening. "It feels good." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against my arm. "Maybe I could pose for you again sometime, like I used to." Her words sent a wave of nausea through me. The thought of her sitting in this room, pretending to be my muse while she betrayed me, was almost too much to bear. "Maybe," I said evenly, pulling away under the pretense of adjusting the easel. "I'll let you know." She hesitated as if sensing something was off, but eventually left the studio. As soon as she was gone, I uncovered the canvas I'd been working on, the final piece. It showed a man and a woman standing in a garden, surrounded by the beauty of nature. They looked perfect, idyllic, until you noticed the snake coiled around the woman's arm, its fangs buried in the man's neck. In the background stood the watcher again, his hands clasped in front of him, a faint smile on his lips. It was time to show the world. The next morning, I made a call to Margaret Fields, my longtime gallery agent. "Ethan," she exclaimed, "I was beginning to think you'd retired. How's the studio?" "It's been productive," I said. "I've been working on a new series, and I think it's ready." Margaret's excitement was palpable. "That's wonderful. What's the theme?" "Betrayal," I said, letting the word hang in the air. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sounds intense," she said finally. "When can I see it?" "Soon," I replied. "I just need a little more time to prepare." I spent the next week finalizing the details. The exhibition was scheduled for 2 weeks out, giving me just enough time to frame the paintings and prepare the gallery. I told Sophia about it casually over dinner one night, framing it as a return to the art world after a long hiatus. She seemed genuinely excited. "It's about time," she said, raising her glass. "I'm so proud of you." Nathan, of course, was invited too. As I walked through the gallery the night before the opening, I felt a strange sense of calm. The paintings hung on the walls like silent witnesses, each one a piece of the puzzle. The final painting, the couple in the garden, hung in the center of the room, commanding attention. Beneath it was a plaque that read, "The truth will out." They thought they'd gotten away with it. Tomorrow, they'd see just how wrong they were. The gallery was a hive of activity that evening. Guests dressed in sleek suits and elegant dresses milled about, their laughter and conversation echoing off the high ceilings. The air buzzed with anticipation, every eye turning toward the centerpiece of the exhibit, the large canvas hanging at the center of the room, shrouded in black silk. I stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived, my expression calm. On the surface, I was the gracious artist, welcoming everyone to my grand return to the art world. But inside, I was coiled like a spring, every nerve alight with tension. Margaret approached, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "The turnout is incredible," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I told you people were dying to see your work again." I gave her a faint smile. "It's good to be back." And it was, but not for the reasons Margaret thought. Sophia and Nathan arrived together, just as I expected. Sophia wore a red dress that clung to her curves. Her hair swept back to reveal the delicate lines of her neck. Nathan looked sharp in a tailored suit, his usual air of confidence radiating from him. They walked in laughing, their heads close together, oblivious to the eyes around them. I stepped forward to greet them. "You made it," I said, keeping my voice steady. Sophia leaned in to kiss my cheek. "Of course we did. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Nathan clapped me on the shoulder. "You've outdone yourself, big brother. The place looks incredible." "Thanks," I replied, my eyes lingering on them for just a moment longer than necessary. "I hope you both enjoy the show." As the evening progressed, I moved through the crowd, answering questions and discussing my work with patrons. But my focus was always on them, Sophia and Nathan. I watched as they wandered from painting to painting, their expressions shifting from admiration to something else. Confusion, perhaps, or unease. The paintings weren't subtle. In one, a crumbling house sat beneath a blood-red sky, its windows shattered, its walls wrapped in thorny vines. Another depicted a masquerade ball, the dancers' masks slipping to reveal grotesque faces beneath. Each piece was a puzzle piece, and as they moved through the gallery, Sophia and Nathan began to put it together. Finally, it was time for the unveiling. Margaret took the microphone, her voice cutting through the lull of conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure to host Ethan Carter's newest collection, Revelations. There was a round of polite applause, and I stepped forward standing beside Margaret as she gestured to the shrouded painting behind us. Ethan has poured his heart and soul into this series, Margaret continued. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the reveal of the centerpiece, the truth will out. She stepped back, leaving me alone with the painting. I gripped the edge of the black silk, my heart pounding. For a brief moment, I hesitated, then I pulled the cloth away. The room fell silent. The painting loomed over the crowd, larger than life. It depicted a man and a woman standing in a lush garden, their bodies entwined. At first glance, it was beautiful, a vision of love and intimacy, but then the details emerged. The man's face was twisted with pain, a snake's fangs buried in his neck. The woman, serene and unbothered, held the snake in her hands, her expression one of quiet triumph. And in the background, a shadowy figure watched from the darkness, his eyes glowing faintly with a mix of anger and sorrow. There was no mistaking who they were. Sophia, Nathan, and me. The silence stretched thick and heavy as the crowd absorbed the image. Then, someone whispered loud enough to cut through the quiet. "Is that?" Another voice answered, "It's his wife and his brother." The murmurs spread like wildfire, rising into a low roar of voices. Guests turned to look at Sophia and Nathan, their eyes wide with shock and judgment. Sophia's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Nathan's confident demeanor cracked, his jaw tightening as he scanned the room, his eyes darting to me. "What is this?" Sophia finally managed, her voice trembling. "It's art,"